I'm back again with some different fabric, and I've got my diluted clear gesso that I'm going to put onto it. I'm not sure what this fabric is. I bought it at a textile market. I have a feeling it's the kind of thing that gets used in tailoring, in lapels, and so on, which leads me to think that it's probably a linen or maybe a hemp or something, but I'm pretty sure it's a natural fiber. I videoed an earlier piece that I was working on. This is definitely linen. And of course, I didn't put the sound on, but I thought I'd talk about it for a minute because it is sort of the size, it's that landscape orientation. I've got this panel and I tried a landscape with acrylic. Didn't like it, sanded it down, tried something else with acrylic, didn't like that, sanded it down again. So now I've gone over with the pencil to give me an indication on placement of the color that I want to put on. Now let me talk a bit about this other piece because I had demoed it, talked about it, and of course didn't have the sound on, but I wanted to reference it because I thought I would point out a couple of things. First of all, it was wet when I was doing all of this, and you can see where this bloom of water has traveled up into what is going to be the sky, and maybe some colors crept up in there. I'm not too worried about it because it's going to be covered up with fabric and stitch and maybe some paint. And so it is what it is, but I can still use it. The water here is a little harsh, but I think I can tone that down and maybe brighten up the sky a little bit. You can see here where I did some testing of the different Inktense blocks. When you look at them, it's not always possible to know exactly what the color is. You really need to test it out. So that's what I've done. And we're going to work on this one today. I've got this dilute gesso and I'm going to put it on, get the fabric pretty well soaked through, get worked in. And this piece of fabric is larger than the panel that I have and what will end up being the finished piece, but that's okay. It's always easier to trim down than add stuff later on. And with the color, unsure how the ink will look on this. So it's definitely an experiment. I just referenced the Inktense blocks, but for the sky, I'm going to use some of the fluid acrylic, the Payne's Gray, which I keep going back to because it just works so well for some mark making and skies and just so much more. I'm just going to dilute this about 50-50 with water so it spreads really well and isn't as intense. I don't want it to be an even sky. I want it to be blustery and cloudy, maybe. And we'll just see what this is going to look like. I haven't tried it on this kind of fabric before. It'll just leave some open areas. I can always go back in later on. It's much looser weaves. I think I'll get some different effects with that. There's my sky. One of the things that I'm trying to learn and develop is some abstraction and using colors out of the norm. So I've got a teal, orange, and a magenta, and I'm going to create some rocks and shorelines. I like using the side of the Inktense to get broad strokes of color. Let's throw in some turquoise and maybe some more of that magenta color. You can see here where I've been marking it, the weave shows up. The threads show up a lot more. Let's see how that looks. Already I can see, okay, I like this, but then the sky is too realistic. So I'm going to try this kind of emerald color and work into the areas in here. Now let's see what I can do with some brushwork. some water and a stiff brush, see what it looks like when I work into the surface a bit more. And I honestly haven't decided what the water is going to look like, so that'll be a surprise. If I'm thinking about my color wheel, what kind of appears to me is some yellows. And if I don't want the colors to mix too much into the water, then I should move away when I'm adding the bars, move away from the water into the shoreline. So rather than drag the shoreline in, at least that's my theory. Wow, that's intense. Okay, so maybe we can look at something orange. And remember, like always, this is going to dry lighter. So this is pretty high contrast. But I have a medium-ish value. The sky's a little too dark, so let's see what I can do with that. Can I lighten it up? I'm not too sure about this. And if it's not going to be a mistake, I can cover it up with stitch. I'd like to add just a brown or a black color. This is more like a rust in here because of the texture. Some of the Inktense is going down. If I lift this linen up, I think I'm going to see a lot of it on the plastic underneath. I've got areas in here that haven't soaked through, but definitely up in the sky. I could probably take a print from that, but I don't feel like it. So I'm going to let it dry in place and then see what it's going to look like. Okay, here it is dry, and you can see on the back how the gesso has soaked in through. It's nice and firm. You might call it stiff, but it's got lots of body to it. And it didn't lighten up as much as I'd anticipated. It doesn't really matter for what I'm going to do. And it does look pretty garish, but I think, as I keep saying, there's going to be fabric and lots of stitch put on. I can lighten it up with some acrylic paints. I could go back in with lighter, but I'm not sure with that if it's going to make too much of a difference. It may look weird right now, but I think it's going to turn out quite well. And as I keep saying, I'm working towards abstraction here and seeing just how I might push it. I've got the panel that I'm going to mount it on underneath, and I can see how it's plenty big enough to go over the panel, even with some shrinkage, because it's going to shrink with the stitching and so on. Onwards, let's get busy and see what this is going to evolve into.